In this video, I'll be showing off a game I made in 3 days, one I made in 3 months, and one I made in 3 years. Game development is weird, and making larger games takes exponentially longer amounts of time, but over the course of this video, you should see me go from a simple game jam that only takes a few minutes to beat, to a larger prototype for a game that is much further along but doesn't have much content or polish, to finally a complete and published commercial Steam game. So, let's start with a 3-day game. I made the 3-day game way back in 2021. I started on a Sunday at about 1 PM, and after brainstorming for a bit, I started to put together some art for the game. The goal for the game was simple: make a decent character controller and then make a big boss fight. So I started putting together the player controller. It was one of the first top-down shooters, or in this case stabbers, that I had ever made, and I took some heavy inspiration from Enter the Gungeon as well as from Archvale. But I got it up and running by 4 PM, adding a bunch of polish and particles and stuff as well. So it was time to start on the boss fight, and I made the boss's health bar and sprite. I figured it'd be cool for the boss fight to have 2 stages, and also to not tell people about the second stage beforehand. So they'd be excited to finally beat the boss, only for it to transform and for them to have a whole second part. As that's my favorite style of game design. And then I also made a bunch of art for the boss. And then on the next day I started making even more art. The boss should have a simple state machine for switching between multiple attacks, so I set that up. Plus, I need to sell the importance of the boss fight a bit, so I set up the camera to focus on the boss and made the health bar fill up whenever you first fight it, which is a nice effect, and at about 1 PM on Monday, I started to make attacks. First off, a circle attack, a bullet hell classic. A bunch of bullets come out of the boss, and they come out in a circle. Most of them pose absolutely no danger to the player, but it helps to fill up the screen and make the boss feel a bit more dangerous than it is. So, riding the insane wave of this first attack's massive success, I made a second. The double burst, and it just shoots 2 bullets at you. I added more attacks after this, but the first stage was pretty boring at this point, so I added a new mechanic to make it more interesting: shield generators. They just appear at times during the second phase and force you to run around and find them. And finally, it was time to make the second stage of the boss. So I made it explode and then turn into a tank. This tank gets new attacks, including a homing missile and a new machine gun attack, and for the entirety of that last day, I polished up the game, fixing the countless bugs they had accidentally introduced. And I also added a bunch of polish and finally published the game. The game ended up being my favorite game jam I had ever made at the time, and is still one of my favorites. I ended up creating a similar top-down shooter system for a larger project that I made later, and I think that it still somewhat holds up, even if it is a bit jank. So next up is a 3 months game. This is my current project, and it's a roguelike where you've angered every god from every mythology, so you have to fight them all off. I've been working on the game for 100 days now, which is about 3 months. Okay, it's a bit longer, but it's hard to get the title to line up, so please just give me this one. I mean, 3.3333 months just doesn't sound as good. Anyways, I started on the game after I played Risk of Rain 2 for a little while, and thought, hey, that's kind of fun. Maybe I should do that. So I made a nice platformer controller, kind of like Hollow Knight, and then got right to work on items. Items are probably the most difficult thing that I've had to design for this game, but they're also my favorite. It's pretty cool to design a system that's really versatile and it could do a bunch of different things, plus stacking. Items can modify stats, create objects, inflict status effects, and more. And it took me a solid month to get a system that I was really happy with. Of course, the item framework wasn't the only thing I was working on this month though, as I also made a basic game loop, a bunch of art, some enemies, and ways to buy items with shops and money. But now that I had this base for the game, I wanted to start filling it up with some content for the second month. I made more items, more art, and more enemies. Plus, I added a whole new system of progression to the game, player upgrades. You get these every few stages, and they allow you to modify your moveset to unlock new powerful moves and fit them into your playing style and build. And I also added the first boss fight to the game, where you fight Ares, the Greek god of war. And I used a bunch of the same methods as the boss fight I made in the other game, including adding a state machine to handle attacks, zooming in on the boss for important events, and also having a lot of bugs that I needed to fix. The second month was a really busy one, as I also added a whole new sort of items, familiars. These are a unique sort of item that help you out and evolve like Pokemon as you stack items for them. Plus, I did some more boring stuff, like making better GUI, a main menu, and a pause menu with settings and stuff. And for the final month, I really focused on polishing the game, bringing it up to a grand total of 25 items, plus things like full controller support, sound effects, and just going back and fixing lots of bugs and issues with this game. And also, I'm trying to balance it. Balancing a roguelike is really hard. And that's what I'm currently working on with the game after these 100 days. I want you to be able to get lots of items, but I also want to force you to make interesting decisions between the items. And I want the game to actually be challenging, so it's a lot of things to juggle. So the game is still a work in progress, but I finished up the month by putting it on Steam. And you can wishlist the game if you're interested, link in the description. Despite all my begging for wishlists on my last video, I still only have a grand total of 2, and one of them is me. So please make the number go up for my fragile ego. This video is sponsored by Unity. The Unity Black Friday sale is going on now and will run until December 1st. And then from December 1st to the 11th, there will be a Cyber Week sale as well. Throughout this Black Friday sale, you can save up to 50% off of over 500 assets. And you can also participate in daily flash deals, which will have assets up to 70% off, with new assets going on flash sales every day. Some of my favorite assets on sale include Feel, which I use on all my games to enhance the game feel and juice. Odin Inspector is also on sale, which is my all-time favorite tool. It makes it super easy to make custom inspectors right in the Unity game engine. You can hide elements that aren't important, build custom buttons, create tools like sliders, color palettes, you can make inventories, and overall just make everything easier to use for yourself and especially for other people in your team who might not be programmers. There are also countless assets like 3D models, sprites, and textures on sale, plus sound effects and music packs which you can use to really help bring your game to life. And finally, there are also game frameworks, like the Kogi engine, which you can use to give yourself a head start with your new game project. So you can use my link in the description to check out the sale and to help support my channel. Thank you to Unity for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to development. So it is finally time to talk about the 3-year project. From the very beginning of planning for this game to the final update for it, I spent around 3 years working on Couch Combat, even if I didn't spend every second actually working on the game. Couch Combat is my first and currently only commercial Steam game. It's a split-screen FPS with a low-poly art style and stacking modifiers that make every round more chaotic than the last. Now, I already have a big video covering every single little detail of development, but it's also nearly 4 hours long, so I'll summarize the years real quick. For the first year of development, I was still learning the basics of Unity. This is my first big game in the engine, and I really had a bit of a learning curve whenever I was learning C#. But to start off this year, I created a movement and got 4 players running around and shooting at each other in the game. And then I made some basic stages as well. I had to learn 3D modeling and animation in Blender from scratch, and I ended up going through many iterations for all the guns and most of the stages in the game. By the end of the first year of development, however, I had menus, several stages, I had completely overhauled the art style a few times, and I had released a solid demo with several stages on itch.io. The second year was the most productive one though, as I really got to work on content and polish. I added tons of guns, from shotguns and assault rifles to grenade launchers and miniguns. I also got the first 2 areas of the game completed, which were both loosely themed to movie genres, the samurai movie area and the cyberpunk/outrun area. However, by the end of the second year, I was already running into lots of problems with the code base. A lot of the older code from the beginning of development was causing problems as it was messy and hard to expand, so I had to spend a lot of time refactoring old systems at this point. And in the third and final year, I started off by spending several months pursuing online multiplayer. I was afraid that not many people would be interested in a paid local multiplayer only game on PC, so I explored options of making the game free or online multiplayer. But I couldn't figure out online, and I didn't want to just give it away. So I ultimately decided to double down on local multiplayer and just make the game as good as possible, adding lots of more content to the game, plus a new twist to it to help sell it. The content was time consuming but fun to make, and I think I made a lot more interesting and unique content in this time period, with some stages with some unique gimmicks and also some more creative guns. But it also took me a while to figure out what the twist should be, and I eventually decided on adding a round in between fighting where players can vote on a modifier, like exploding bullets, double jumps, or dual wielding, and these modifiers will stack up over rounds, making the game more and more chaotic until a final round comes with a bigger modifier, and then the modifiers reset and the cycle starts all over again. So after completing this and fixing an ungodly amount of bugs, I finally released the game on July 13th, 2022. Around 2.5 years after I started, and I continued to update it for a few months afterwards. So that was the difference between 3 days, 3 months, and 3 years of game development. I hope that Mythomania doesn't take me 3 years to complete, but I do also think that I learned a lot from my time of making Couch Combat. So I think I'm a much better game developer now, and I should hopefully be able to make a better game. Anyways, thanks for watching. Be sure to wishlist Mythomania and check out my devlogs over it.